Welcome back to the Wildlands Garden, and in tonight's episode I'm going to show you how to make a worm compost bin system, or a vermicompost worm bin, and it's either free or certainly very cheap. So what you'll need is 3 5-gallon or 15-litre buckets such as these, 1 lid for the 3 buckets, but you just need only 1 lid which goes on the top, and it's a very simple system in the bottom bin. This bin requires no work doing to it whatsoever, and that's where you're going to collect your worm liquid or worm tea, which you can use as a fertilizer. And then the top 2 bins are going to have holes drilled in the bottom of them in a grid-like structure. I'll tell you about that in a moment. And then you need a lid on the top. The lid doesn't need any holes in it, so that if you're keeping your worm bin outside, it won't get wet when it rains. So let me show you the principle. So your middle bin, we're going to drill holes across this section here in a grid-like fashion. You want to use a 5mm or larger drill bit. So I've got a 6mm drill bit here. That's a 3/16 drill bit if you're in America, or slightly larger size, and that's to allow the worms to pass from one bin upwards to the next bin. So the logic is thus. So the bottom bin will collect your fertilizer, your liquid leftovers from the worms, and any moisture that drips through. So this will have holes in it allowing that to happen. That stacks on here. You place your worm food and bedding in the second section. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. And then the third and final bin also have holes in the bottom. That will stack on the top of your worms and the worm food, and you'll also put more kitchen waste or composting materials in the top bin, and that allows the worms to travel up from the middle bin to the top bin. And then the middle bin will keep your worm castings, which you can use as fertilizer or add to your compost, or use in the garden as a mulch. And if you're gardening on a large scale like us, you might want to have several of these or use larger bins. You can use the big square plastic carrying storage bins, the ones that are like 50 or 100 litres in size, and again you would get 3 of those and stack them on top of each other, exactly the same as this but on a larger scale. I'm actually going to have multiple round bins, but for today let's get one bin made. So first of all, let's get our holes drilled in 2 of the 3 buckets. So we've got our holes drilled. I didn't follow a grid-like structure, I just did like 1 inch, 2 or 3 centimetres apart. We've got 2 buckets, 2 sets of holes in 2 of the buckets, and the 3rd bucket with no holes in. So the 3rd bucket's going to stay as is, and the 2nd bucket is going to go on top of there. And then on the top bin I'm going to drill some holes just around the top here to allow for humidity to escape, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to keep the lid solid so that the worms won't get wet when it rains. And just a little footnote, you need to be careful not to push too hard when you're drilling so that you don't crack your bucket. So I've got a couple of cracks from where I did press too hard, so that's a good tip, especially on these side ones. So next is the composting itself, and also what the worms will actually bed in and will actually turn into your worm cast and your composting for you. So I've got some brown corrugated cardboard. I'm just going to rip that up into sort of small manageable pieces. I'm just going to use the lid as a little makeshift table while I rip that up. And as with any composting, you don't want to use shiny or printed shiny cardboard, and you want to make sure that any staples and tape connecting the cardboard box, if you're using that together, is removed, and you've just got brown card. And then I'm going to put the card back in this pot. I'm going to use a watering can to moisten it and make it wet. Give it a soak. And if you don't have access to well water like we do, then collect some rainwater out of a water butt, or set a large bucket outside without holes in it and collect some rainwater if you can, because you don't really want to be using chlorinated water to wet your cardboard down. To start, I've also got a small amount, maybe 3 or 4 handfuls of stuff out of my kitchen scraps bucket. So in this case, any kitchen scraps. I've got some brown tea bags, I've got some ends of strawberries and their leaves, I've got a few eggshells which are great broken up. And then to help with the worm's digestion, you can use some rock dust, or I'm just going to use a little bit of builder's sand. Going to sprinkle that in the top too. A couple of big pinches, sort of teaspoon, tablespoon size. So now we have our collection of some kitchen scraps and our moist cardboard. Let's put that in our buckets. So I'll take a top bucket and we'll put our cardboard in. Which is previously moistened, better to leave it soaking overnight. We've got our starting kitchen scraps going like so. And then we're going to get some forest floor bits. This can be some leftover compost. Coir is particularly good. And I'm just going to chuck that in the top as well. So here is my makeshift worm storage. I got these worms from a plant market at the weekend. And I've only got about 100 worms. You might be better off starting with more. But if you have friends with an allotment, you should be able to source some worms from somebody at your allotment area. Or you can also generally get them on Amazon. They're fairly easy to source, and there are actually a lot of specialist companies, so have a Google. And for us in Portugal, there is a Wormery supplier in Castelo Branco as well. So here are my worms in their makeshift bucket. You can see they're down the bottom here. All right, there they are. And these are red wigglers. So I've got my makeshift bucket, and I'm just going to tip my worms in there. And there's a few stuck around the edge, so I'm going to make sure we get those out. Come on, guys. And then I'm just going to mix this up. So my worms are nicely mixed in with my garden waste. And then that's going to be my second bucket. That bucket goes on the top. And then any new garden waste I'll put in the top section once the bottom has started composting down, and the worms will travel up through these holes into your next bucket. And then you've got your lid to stop the rain getting in. So there we have it. A very easy to make, it's a 10-minute job. 3-tiered, free worm bucket, vermicompost for the win. So let me know if you've got worms and if you're using a similar system or your system. I'd love to know if you've got alternatives. And it's definitely recommended for free compost. And remember that the worms themselves, they don't like to get very cold. So anything near to freezing or below, and they don't like to get very hot. So anything over about 55 Fahrenheit or 30 centigrade is too hot. So they don't want to be in direct sunlight at all. And they don't want to be left outside if it drops below freezing. So if you're in a very hot country like us, where in the summer we can go up to around 40 or even 45 degrees centigrade. Definitely don't want these in the sun, so you'd need to put them in the coolest place you can, preferably in the dark, or certainly in the shade to keep them cool. And if it's going to be very cold at night, then always think about maybe bringing them inside, putting them in your garage if you have one. In our case, we put ours in the greenhouse during the night, but in the daytime, when the greenhouse gets hot, we just pop them out in the shade. So there we have it, worm composting for the win. So thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you very soon from the Wildlands Garden with more tips, tricks, gardening hacks, propagating and more. So once again, we'll see you very soon in another episode from the Wildlands Garden. Ciao.